Yeah, we're live. Gonna try to brighten it up just a skosh. Let's see what happens here. See if we can get it too hot. Oh, that's better. Yes, we're live. Tonight we're talking about a couple of things. One of them, I just posted a video, as a matter of fact, moments ago on a 5-liter Ford head test that I did way back. We did the stock E7TE heads, and I did this for a reason, and we're going to talk about that tonight because we're going to bring up something that I don't really think happened. I tested the stock E7TE heads, 5-liter Ford heads that they used on all the 5 liters except for the 86. Terrible flow. They flowed like 165 CFM, which is not good. Which is why even with our cammed combination with flat top pistons and valve reliefs and stuff, and our mild comp cam, the thing only made like 306 horsepower. It made 1 horsepower per cubic inch, which is not terribly stellar when you look at what things can be doing. But part of the reason it's being held back that much is because of lack of head flow, as we saw. So what I did was we took that combination. We ran it was a 306. It was 30 over. It was a flat top piston. It had forged rods and pistons, although it didn't need it for this power level. We just were doing other things with it later on. We ran the stock heads. The stock heads had a valve spring upgrade on them, as we needed, because we had a camshaft that was 512 lift, and it was a 218, 224. It was a 264 comp cam. So it just had valve springs on it. We also had rockers on it. We had a good dual plane intake, which is ideal for the combination that we had together because it was like a 6,000 RPM motor. It was an RPM air gap. We had a 650 Demon. We had long tube headers, 1.5/8, had an MSC distributor, and we ran this carburetor. We could have run it fuel injected with similar results, although the fuel injection tends to make a little bit less power, not because of EFI versus carburation. So hold your comments, although you can make comments about it, but it's not EFI versus carburation. It's more the design of the intake manifolds, basically, that we would be using. So you could get them to make the same power if we run them on the same intake manifold. Although the carburation usually tends to do a little bit better because of charge cooling. But if we put a carburetor on top of a throttle body injection where we use the throttle bodies in that throttle body unit and blow the fuel basically into a carbureted manifold, we get similar things, just a little bit with more tuning ability, but not individual port tuning. But that's another topic for another live feed. So we had a 4-barrel carburetor, 4-barrel intake manifold. We had the stock heads, headers, a decent short block, and then we ran it. We ran it with the stock heads and 306 horsepower. We put a set of GT40P heads, just your run-of-the-mill set, and picked up like 30 horsepower, which is pretty consistent with what I see. We've run P heads and the regular GT40 iron heads, and those all kind of tend to do the same thing. You would be, be splitting hairs trying to get the difference in power between a P head and a regular GT40 head. And there might be fans of both of them out there, but I'm looking at the big picture. I'm looking at a GT40 P head versus a regular GT40 head as comparison to like the Airflow Research head or a 170R head from TrickFlow or the Canfield or the Edelbrock, some kind of realistic, some sort of performance oriented head. Even the aluminum GT40, which I included in this video, made considerably more power than the GT40P head. And the GT40P head, I think, was on par with what we've normally come to expect. Obviously, there are guys getting more power from those. You can mill them, you can port them, you can do lots of stuff, and they can be made to have power. And they're the thing that I recommend people get for if you're going to do it cheaply and want more power, an extra 30 horsepower. Who doesn't want that? Because it came really with no loss at all compared to the stock head. So it's just basically better everywhere, which is exactly what you want. So if you're going to get something like that, and you can go to the wrecking yard, and hopefully you can still go to the wrecking yard and get it cheaply, then that's a good way to go. So that's what I recommend. And the test was really not done. This was part of another test I did with lots of cylinder heads. But the discussion for tonight and the discussion in the video was more that we know that a good set of cylinder heads, Canfield, TrickFlow, Airflow Research, whatever, especially modern stuff, because this was done a while ago. But we know that a new cylinder head and a good cylinder head will make a lot more power, certainly than the stock head, and even more than it's a pretty good step up from a GT40 P head. So a P head's about 30 horsepower. The aluminum GT40 head was about another almost 20 on top of that, between 15 and 20 on top of that. So then that begs the question right there. The GT40 aluminum head was better than its iron counterpart. But is it enough better to justify the difference in cost between the wrecking yard head and a Ford Racing GT40 aluminum head, because it never came on any factory motor. So is that enough to justify that? And then the next question is, because we're going to go another step above that, because a GT40 aluminum head is not a serious performance head, at least not in comparison to the other stuff that we tested. The Airflow Research 165 made the most power of the heads that we tested in that group. And the thing is, if you look at the airflow numbers offered by an Airflow 165 head at the time that we tested it, it was 250 to 260 CFM. That's enough to support another 100 horsepower on top of, and fairly comfortably, 100 horsepower on top of what we already did. So we weren't anywhere near what this thing can flow. And I bring this up because a lot of guys, and I get this question about throttle bodies and lots of things. Okay, well, what's the absolute max limit of a 78 millimeter throttle body or a stock set of LS1 heads or 5-liter throttle body? And they don't realize that whatever that is, if it's the stock E7TE heads, what's the max you can make out of that stock head? Well, the answer is, as always, it depends, because it is going to be limiting, and we saw that when we put a good set of heads on, we gained more power. But we could make more power too with the stock head. If we put a better camshaft in, more lift, more duration, if we put more camshaft in with a stock head, we could make more power with the stock head. Now, it would make a lot more power with a good head, and that's normal, but we're not at the flow limit of the stock head in terms of absolutes. And that's the way that guys, for some reason, want to understand. Same thing with throttle bodies and things. Well, what's the max that you can make through a throttle body? Well, how much draw are you talking about drawing through that? Like when we airflow test a throttle body, let's say it flows 700 CFM, and you go, okay, we do the math, 700 CFM will support X amount of power. Yes and no, because we're only flowing it at a certain depression. If you have more depression, if you have more draw on that, it will flow more air. And I'll give you a perfect example as a tangent for this story. But when we ran this stock set of heads on a 306, it made 306 horsepower. When we ran on a 392, a bigger combination where we were testing even more powerful, potentially powerful cylinder heads, it made like 380 horsepower, 386, if I remember right, something like that. So if we calculate the amount of power that it made relative to its displacement, it made a lot, or not relative to its displacement, it didn't make very much power. Relative to its airflow, it made a lot. I mean, that's a big number. And the reason for that is if you measured the vacuum, in the system, you'd see that the big motor was developing a lot of vacuum because it was drawing really hard on those restrictive heads. If we put it on an even bigger motor, a 400-inch motor or a 500-inch motor, it would be drawing even more. At some point, we would get to a point of, and we're probably already there given the amount of power that we made relative to the airflow, but we get to a point of diminishing returns. I'm just saying that we weren't there. We were 80 horsepower away from that with the 306. And when we saw the difference between the stock head on that 392 and any kind of good head, it may have been 150 or 200 horsepower because we were so restricting that thing. And that's kind of the way they work out. Same thing with throttle bodies, is that there's not an absolute limit. The throttle body doesn't just stop flowing. It's still flowing that amount of air. And what can you do with that kind of airflow? So after we ran the aluminum heads, the aluminum GT40 heads, we put on a set of Airflow Research 165 heads. And they flowed, like I said, they flowed 250 or 260, which is enough to support over 500 horsepower. And we were only making near 400. And part of the reason for that is not because the heads aren't good. They're like, hey, look, I'm doing my part. We can make a lot more power. Let's do it. To do that, you have to put more motor underneath it. And our 500 lift, 218, 224, or 212, 218, it was a fairly small cam. The 264 cam was not going to do that. I mean, if I had run the 274 cam or, and then a single plate intake and more compression and a dry sump and, all the things that you could do to make more power, then it could have taken advantage more of what that head had to offer. Could we get that 302 to make 500 horsepower? Yeah, with enough compression and enough RPM and the right kind of intake and carburetor and head, all the other things that it needs to do that, the head will be able to do that. It makes enough. The stock head, obviously not. And so the difference between the stock head and a head that can support 500 horsepower, the difference would be dramatic as we start making our combination, even more effective. And that's the thing. And the reason that I wanted to show this is that I wanted to show that now that we've stepped up from, like, let's say the GT40P head to the GT40 aluminum head, and now we've stepped up another 40 or 45 horsepower with the airflow research head, which I think we also limited by valve spring. And I mentioned that in the video, that I would like to go and redo that test. I don't know that we'll change peak power on that instance, but it's not going to roll over the same. It's not going to fall off hard like it went into, valve float crash. So I'd like to redo that. But even still, we're this much power above an aluminum GT40 head, and even more so above an iron GT40 head. The question is that amount of power, what number you can pick, whatever number you want. We went from 336, let's say, to 396. So it's 60 horsepower. Is 60 horsepower, and we gain power everywhere. So not just on the peak, it picked up power, it picked up torque, it picked up everywhere from 3,000 on up. Is that amount of extra power worth whatever the cost difference is? And you guys let me know when you're commenting. Is that amount of power worth the cost difference between the junkyard GT40 head or GT40P head and the Airflow Research 165 head? Now, there are other options besides the 165 that will do that as well. I haven't tested them, but I'm maybe the Skip White or the Enforcer or some of the other low dollar heads. Those things, and even a trick flow twisted wedge head is near 240 or 245 in terms of flow. So it's got enough to support this level. I don't think that their as cast twisted wedge head will do what, as a matter of fact, we know that it won't do what that CNC ported Airflow Research 165 head did, and not what the 185 did. But their new 11R stuff certainly will. In fact, might do more than that. So the thing is that amount worth it? And if it's not, if it is, that's great. Then you get that head and you want to make more power. That I honestly, and it's more expensive to do this, to be this way, but and that's part of the reason that I like the LS stuff so much, is that it has good cylinder heads. And so you do these other things to it and you look like a hero. Like with an LS3, it's easy to make lots of power. You get 600 plus horsepower worth of cylinder head to play with. So as you're sticking camshaft in there, you look like a hero. It'd be nice if a 5-liter Ford was like that. If it had 300 CFM heads, then you'd have to put a 205 airflow head on it, or a trick flow or dart or whatever. And then that's what it takes. But if you have a bunch of extra head flow, what you then can do is go slightly milder on the cam timing, so you can make the power that you want, but also have better drivability. And that's the nice thing about having lots of head flow. When you over cylinder head the thing, not in terms of size, but in terms of airflow versus the kind of power output that you're getting. So if we put a 500 horsepower airflow potential head on a 400 horsepower combination, we're not going to have to run very much camshaft. And therefore it's going to drive around much better, but still have the power. That's what I like about that combination. The downside to that is, of course, cost. good cylinder heads that flow like that you'd have to put on a 5-liter are not cheap. You already have them on an LS, which is why so many people swap them, take the 5-liter out and put an LS in their Mustang or other Ford product, because a lot of times it's as cheap to do that as it is to buy a set of aftermarket heads. So again, the question is to you guys, is that amount worth it? And the other reason that I wanted to do this, and maybe somebody has brought this up already, I'll be surprised if somebody hasn't. I have to go back through them to find out. But long ago, Carcraft did a story where the famous Airflow Research 165 head story, where they supposedly made over 400 horsepower, 403 is the number that I looked up today, with Airflow Research 165 heads on a 5-liter, but with a stock camshaft. And I'm certain, 99.9% certain, that that's not accurate, that can't be done. Even with rockers, and it had all the things that we would run. First of all, it's run on an engine dyno. That means it has an electric water pump. It doesn't have accessories. It's got headers on it, which they always run. It's got a dual plane intake manifold. It's got a carburetor. It's got an MSD distributor. So it doesn't have 5-liter Ford EFI stuff or the accessories. I'm okay with that. That's the way that I test all of my stuff anyway. But I've tested hundreds of those, certainly more than most people in the industry. And I know what they do. I've run umpteen camshafts and cylinder heads and combinations, and know what these do, and know what even the more modern stuff does, the more modern cylinder heads and stuff, because I've run a lot of the 11R stuff, and I know what they do. And even though the stock camshaft is actually pretty good on a 5-liter Ford, relatively speaking, because, and I'm sure that Ford knew this, we don't have much head flow, so we're going to put camshaft in it. So the factory camshaft is actually pretty good. Even with that, I don't think it's possible to make that number that they're showing with a stock camshaft and a 1.7 rocker with an Airflow Research 165 head and a dual plane intake manifold. I don't think it'll do it. I think it's going to be about 370 or 380. But having never done it, I'm going to never say never. So that's something that I want to look at redoing. I just need to get more information on what they did with their short block. I just need to know what it is that they had. Did they have a stock 5-liter short block? If so, then that would be okay. That'd be easier. And did they have a TRW, an early forged version? I need to know what they had. I need to know what short block that they had. They're just running a factory short block and a factory head gasket. I just want to duplicate all the things so that I can say, look, this is as close as I can get to making that. And so I can either learn for myself that, yes, you can do this. You should do this. Everybody should be doing this. You should run the stock camshaft with rockers and a cylinder head that works good, like that Airflow Research 165 head, which is hard to argue, unless you get an 11R head from TrickFlow, that's not a really good, I mean, it is a really good head. So if you're going to do it with something, that would be a good one to try it with. I want to try to duplicate that because, like I said, I don't think that's possible, but I want to try it so that I can either be wrong and say, look, it is possible and you guys get to benefit from this, or yeah, it's not possible. So whatever it is, let's get the information out there. And I like looking back at this stuff, and it'll also give me the opportunity to run another 165 test and not have to worry about spring rate, so that I don't have to have this thing fall over. Maybe it is that combination needs a single plane intake to rev out, although with a stock head, with a stock camshaft, it's not going to want to make power at a really high RPM, especially with a dual plane manifold. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious about a lot of that stuff, and these are the things that keep me up at night. So let's see what you guys got going on. As you can see, we've moved. The only thing I have here at this house still is the internet. So we're getting that taken care of very shortly here. Let's see, Hyundai Motorsports. The LS7 intake has different ports than the LS3, yes. The Ford E7 TE heads can be made to flow 300 ZFM. I was waiting for the rest of that, and he brought it. 50 inches of water, that's right. Anyone put an L7 intake on an L3 heads with an LQ4 block? That's a whole bunch of wrong there. The LS3 heads on a 6-liter block are good, but you're going to have some trouble with the L7 intake manifold. The E7 145cc intake runner is the biggest runner Ford made. The GT40 is bigger than that, and so is a 351 Windsor 69 head is bigger than that, I think. Let's see what else we got going on here. Put some Hemi heads on the 302. Tesla CHI headed Boss 302 versus a Windsor style AFR trick flow headed 302. I've run the CHI 302 heads before and they work really well. Obviously, we saw Engine Masters they did, and I've run them on a I've ran them on a 302, but I also ran them on a 351 Cleveland and a 408 Windsor. I ran a set on a 408 Windsor as well. Ascast Twisted Wedge 170 on a 347, 10-1. I have lots of 347 tests up that have where we tested the Twisted Wedge Ascast head that I ran it for Hot Rod. So we ran the Ascast one, we ran a ported one. It's a 347. It probably was about 10-1. I think we ran an XFI camshaft, 236, 248 at 50. I'm going to run a 351 Windsor with GT40P heads, some BBK shorties, and my 49 Ford. You might have to drill out the heads for the 1/2-inch head stud, so make sure you remember that. Are aluminum Cleveland heads any good? Yes, there are lots of good aluminum Cleveland heads out there now. Aaron, you think that the 165 is better than a 185 for a 302? Beard, you really have to do oil mods on a 455. People say that, and they also say about Cleveland's, but I've not done that to either one of the Cleveland or 455s that I've run. Todd, what's up? So you're back home. You're gonna get on the build. Cool. Let me know what's happening. Any chance of you doing a Hellcat engine power adder comparo? I don't have a Hellcat. I don't make Hellcat money. Beer. I don't know why they keep saying that. That happens. Things. The same reason people have been saying you need to run 7-1 or 7.5-1 or 8-1 compression on turbo motors, and it gets said and then it gets tossed around because then people can say that and think that they sound important. And maybe those things do become necessary at some engine speed or some kind of race class. We'd run upper bearing shells on both the top and the bottom so that they're grooved. Yeah, 360-degree oiling. That's good. But the Cleveland stuff they're talking about is running an external oil line from the front to the back or from the back to the front, I think is what the guys are doing. Jackson 302 with Blueprint 195 heads. I've run those. I have a set of CNC heads that I think that I don't know who does them for them, but they work good. 331 with 165 heads, wheelbase media, performer RPM, custom comp grind. 482 horsepower, and then put it on my 65 Mustang with a 5-speed. It'd have to be a pretty big step up from a 274 cam to make 482 horsepower. What's a good 400 plus horsepower combo with an E7TE? You'd have to port the E7TE heads to get there. TFS 11R 170 versus an Airflow Research 165. Make that test happen. Settle an argument. Why is there an argument? There's no loser there. Yeah, I'm sure that did I read that wrong? Wheelbase. Yeah, I'm sure that's flywheel horsepower. It's not 482 is not it's not wheel horsepower. Then I could say really funny things. What Ford do we say needed oil mods? The Cleveland was the one that they were saying needed oil mods, and I would imagine maybe the 400M too by association. Christopher, happy to help, man. Buick, Olds, Pontiac, oil mods. The one he was talking about was a Buick 455. Anything I got to do on an 84 5-liter block putting E7 heads on it? No, just be careful with your, the piston to valve clearance. And as it turned out, I got bit the other day from a set of heads hitting pistons hitting the heads on an LS because they were almost 20 thousandths out. Jeff, so we need to see the Big Bang 351 happen over again. Yep. Steven, I just joined the chat, but the 11R is the best choice for a stock bottom end 302. The one thing that I would wonder about the 11R head that might make it a choice for some people over the Airflow Research 165 head, it's not going to be flow or performance potential, but for a stock bottom end, I think maybe the 11R might have more piston to valve clearance. That's something I would like to check and verify. T, what was your question before? I was going to go back and see. I don't see your question. Would the Ford Racing E303 cam get it there? GT40 irons. Get it where? To 400 horsepower? No. I forgot the exact number on flow on Powerhead's version of the E7T. Yeah, but they're not like a I would be surprised if they got to 200. Adam, been waiting for 5-liter head comparison. Ended up taking a shot in the dark. If you pick 180 Airflow Research 185s, that's not a shot in the dark. That's a pretty good shot. That's more like a dart throw into the center. For a 331, yeah, you're going to be happy with that. Utah's in the house. The 11R does have more piston to valve clearance. So the thing is that is it a twisted wedge design then? So I'm assuming that it is. I just can't remember. It's been so long since I ran those. I liked them and I liked the way they looked. They almost look like billet heads, which I thought was awesome externally. But if they are a twisted wedge design with an altered valve position and they have increased piston to valve clearance, the nice thing is you could make more power with those because you could put more camshaft in if you're limited by a stock piston. The downside to that is that if it is that and you want to put pistons in it, then you have to get specific twisted wedge pistons. It's not a big deal because if you're buying pistons anyway, you can buy a piston that has that valve relief, and you can also buy, or at least we could, I'm sure it's still available, you could buy pistons with multiple valve reliefs. So we could run line, because when I did this head test, we had to run inline valves on most of the heads and then also twisted wedge stuff because they were part of a couple of different groups. So we had to have, we had, multiple valve pockets in there. Ever tried Cheez-Its, Duo's Bacon and Cheddar? No, but it does sound good, though. I'm going to have to go get those now. So curse you for that. Arby's has no Wagyu burger for $6. I like my favorite thing at Arby's are the cherry turnovers. A 224, 233, a 50 cleared by a mile with an 11R head. How much does fly cutting a stock piston affect the balance? You're cutting them all roughly the same, so not very much. Mike, if you haven't done it yet, will you do a test with E85 and nitrous to see on the fuel side, is E85 pump gas or race gas work better with the cold burning E85, please? I don't understand what you're asking. Do you want me to run nitrous on E85? I've done that a lot. It works just fine. Do you want me to run nitrous with gasoline? We've done that a lot. It works fine. Do you want me to somehow combine those? Do you want me to run it on pump gas and then have E85 be the fuel enrichment side? Because I've seen some guys do that with race gas. They add their enrichment for the nitrous. The fuel side of that comes from some other high octane deal. The problem I have with that is, and you can easily solve this, is that you have to have, if you have E85, if you're doing that with E85 just on the nitrous and not in the rest of the combination, you have to jet accordingly to the change in air fuel that you would need to run, the amount of fuel that you would need to run with the E85. So you have to jet it up for E85 use compared to gasoline, but all that's doable. Steven, 224, 233 clear by a mile. I'd like to know how much that is. Is it 30 thousandths? Is it 70? Is it 150? Mustang Mike, just to check with a 239 at 50, one of my stock bottom end builds, and it was 120 exhaust and 90. A stock 5-liter short block, you fit a 239 cam? I think you need to check that again. My guess is that has a piston with valve reliefs in it. Richard, have you gone any bigger than an AFR 185 on a 30 over 5-liter? At what point do you get shrouding issues? I don't know that I worry about shrouding issue. If you go much bigger on the valve, I might start to worry about the valve hitting the edge of the cylinder. Although it probably is not going to do that on a 4-inch bore, though, right? Even if you put, I think we've run 205 heads on those on a 4-inch bore. He's asking about flame travel with different fuels. Did anything in there say flame travel? I didn't see anything in there that said that. I don't need to see the cam card. It's just that when somebody says something about fitting a camshaft that's 15 or 20 degrees bigger than anything that I've ever seen fit in available piston to valve clearance, it has me concerned. What is the ballpark of additional piston to valve clearance with 11R head versus a traditional 20-degree AFR head? I would like to do that. I don't have both of those to run that test like on a stock, because that's one of the questions I get all the time is, will a 274 cam fit with a stock 5-liter short block? And then the question then becomes, well, with which head? Because a lot of aftermarket heads have bigger valves. They have not a stock size E7TE valve. They have a 184 or a 194 or a 202 valve. And then that becomes a problem because if there is a valve relief, then the valve doesn't go into the valve relief. It overhangs it. So you eliminate the benefit of the valve relief if it has one. And so that becomes problematic. So then some heads fit and some heads don't just because of their valve size. And then obviously valve drop comes into play, the chamber size, the chamber shape, the design, the valve angle, all of that stuff, which is why I tell people the same thing whenever they send this stuff in, is like, you have to measure it. If you're trying to run lots of camshaft and you're trying to run stuff that's at the limit kind of camshaft, you have to check it. I've never even been able to run a 230-degree camshaft in a stock bottom end 5-liter. Short duration tight LSA versus long duration wide LSA, did they equal each other out? No, those are, you should not be thinking about it like that. You should be thinking about valve events. You should be thinking about making the camshaft work for the RPM range that you want. The one thing that the tight LSA will do is it will reduce piston to valve clearance, and the wide LSA will help piston to valve clearance, usually. I'd be curious to see a 185 versus 205 versus a 225 on a 302. Well, that video is already up. I didn't do it with the airflow research heads. I did it with dart heads, and I ran a 170, a 195, a 210, and a 225. Power difference on a 306, E303 Ford cam 10-1, GT40P heads. Question differences between long tubes and short tube headers on street motor. I have videos up, I think, on the 5-liter testing shorty headers versus long tubes. Long tube headers are worth power, and they're not just worth power at the top, but most of the power gain comes down low because they have better scavenging. My dad said the Chevy 250 straight six is the best engine ever built for a car. One of the tests that I do want to do, I need to make this happen. I put that on my list of the million other things I got to get done. But one of the sayings that people say, one of these myths, is that they say that at like a 300-inch, the inline 6-cylinder Ford, the 300, that for some reason they think that inline 6-cylinders are torqueier than V8s are. And I'm assuming, although they don't ever say this, but I'm thinking that they mean of equal displacement. So what I'd like to run is I'd like to compare, and I just need to get a 300 inline 6-cylinder on the dyno and run a stock one. But I'd like to run an inline 6-cylinder, a 300-inch one, and then a 300 or 302 5-liter V8 to show them that that's not the case. That displacement actually makes the torque and not the kind of engine that you're doing it with. What's your take on World Product Windsor Senior aluminum heads with the 202 intake, an Edelbach Performer intake, and say an N41 cam? Do you have piston to valve clearance for that head with that size valve? And if you take a look at all the head tests that I did, we tested those Windsor heads, and they're not equal to an airflow research or a new trick flow head. They don't do what those do in terms of power. I don't know about fitment because I've never run the combination, and I'm not sure what. Did you say what stock bottom end that is or something? And I don't know. Does Anderson give specs on that N41 cam? I think that it's like the 274 cam, but I can't swear to that. Go for BRAD. 347 stroker, flat top, 11 cc valve relief. Do you know how deep it is though? Is it like 180, 200, 250? XFI 236. What is the best EFI intake and what horsepower can I expect? You're going to want some kind of shorter runner deal. I don't know if they make the RPM2 by Edelbrock, or the System Axe is pretty good. Or you could run TrickFlow has that or rather Edelbrock has that Victor EFI, but those things lose so much down low. You could also run the converted Victor Junior or Super Victor if they have that. Grooves. A friend of mine is putting a cam in a 6.4 Hemi. Cam Motion says they don't know if it will or won't have enough piston to valve clearance without VVT limiters. Ideas on how to test this. Yeah, you have to manually actuate it, and it would be a real pain. You could, well, I don't know that you could even take the limiter out. I guess you could take it out and lock it in place and test it advanced and retarded and see, or just test where it is now, and you could actually do the calculations on where it would be at other positions. How much are you changing it? How much are you going to a 220 cam or a 210 cam or a 205 cam or something? It would definitely be better to be safe. An Edelbrock Victor intake for 331 will definitely lose power compared to the other stuff. Casey, I have a stock bottom end 1992 TRW piston 302, strict flow 170 heads, Anderson N51 cam. Oh, so it's a 230, 235 with Edelbrock EFI intake, made 343, 368. Great street. Is that at the tire, and is that through an automatic? Is my question. I'm curious why that combination would make more torque than horsepower. Would a mild port job? Yeah, the Windsor house, those Windsor heads would definitely benefit from porting. Although I don't know who does really good porting on Windsor stuff. $225, $230, give or take. Yeah, Grooves, that would be what I would recommend. I was just trying to figure out a way to do it without ruining the phaser that's in there. But if you got another one and you didn't care about it, then you could put it in different positions. Because then once you take it apart and see how it works, you can make your own limiters. I mean, they're just blocks that you put in there. And so you could block it all the way to one side, all the way to the other, and then block it on both sides to be in the middle, and just figure out how much piston valve clearance you have. My guess on most aftermarket camshafts is that you're going to run out of total swing potential. So let's say that you have, some of them have as much as 50 degrees, and they only do that usually during part throttle stuff. A lot of times there's only 8 or 10 degrees variance at wide open throttle, going from, like when we do a dyno test, from 2,500 or 3,000 up to 6,000 or 6,500. They don't swing the cam very much during that run at wide open throttle. Like I said, somewhere usually between 8 and 10 degrees is the maximum amount. All this 40, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees that they're doing is all done during part throttle stuff. five speed to the tire, and you followed a ride up from muscle busting. They had similar results. I'm just curious. What normally we see mild combinations making more torque than horsepower, which is not unusual because, like, if you look at a 5-liter Mustang engine with the factory EFI, they rated it at like 225 and 300 foot-pounds. So it was a low RPM motor with, it had a decent camshaft in it, but it had no cylinder head and a really long restrictive intake manifold on it. So it was designed to make lots of torque, and that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like a Ford's version of a GM tune port motor, and that's exactly what it was. And then as you start adding other things to it, you get to the point where now the horsepower is approaching what the torque was. And then, and you'll, if you watch the video that I posted tonight, you'll see that you could eventually get to the point where you're making more horsepower than torque. That's when it's starting to become more of a performance motor. What would be your choice of head for 408 Windsor, 9 and 9.71 compression, comp 236 cam? Take a look at the 408 video that I have up. I ran that camshaft, and then we stepped up to an even bigger camshaft. And I think we ran trick flow heads on it. Any sort of 205 head will work good. An Airflow Research 205, the trick flow 205. All of those are really good. Oh, we got to have a video, or we got to have a poll, right? Can you make 400 horsepower on a 302 Ford with the stock cam? Ask your community. Boom. That just happened. You could measure valve drop. JR, my Eagle crank and my motor recommends no more than 6,500. So you know, factory cast LS cranks and even 5-liter cranks run more than 6,500 all the time, even under boost. Like to see some Oldsmobile stuff, that would be cool. TFS stage 3 too big for 347. My twisted wedge 170 heads. I don't know what the stage 3 is. I don't know how big it is. A 347 runs really good. And again, take a look at the video that I have up where we tested the twisted wedge heads with that 236, 248 camshaft and see how it did. It has been done. I like that. Now without a power adder. TFS stage 3 is a good camshaft for the 347. I'm trying to remember what cam we ran in the 408. It might have been a stage 3, although I thought it was bigger than that. Do I need to change the pole? It's the pole is not with boost. we know you can do it with boost. I should have said NA, right? X right now. You mentioned the tune port. I wonder how basic TPI 305, 350, or 400 would do in a car hauler. They work really good. That would be an excellent truck motor. We've said that time and time again. So Brandon, it's 236, 248, 574, 595. Yeah, that's like that XFI camshaft. What larger than E7TE heads clear stock pistons on a stock 85 roller block? A 204 216 cam should clear without any problem. Correct me if I'm not wrong, but it seems like small block Ford blocks are more susceptible to RPM than peak horsepower numbers. Yeah, it might be. I've had people tell me that not the power number wasn't so much the thing that that it was RPM. But the counter to that is the one that working with Jimmy and Nathan from HP Performance, they weren't running a lot of RPM. They were running less than 6,500, if I remember right, with a turbo, and it broke because it was making 800 foot-pounds or whatever. 400 flywheel horsepower, not wheel horsepower. That would not be possible with a stock camshaft NA. Anyone here run Holley high rise on a 347 stroke, or is it better than RPM or 2 versus specs? That's one thing I haven't tested. A high ram would be a good combination on a 347, and I think it would be even better on a 408 on the 351 version. Carcraft did in the early 2000s. They did. I don't have the magazine anymore. I just threw away a ton of stuff. 12-to-1 compression at 2.2 2.2 rockers. As I remember, the magazine article used a Victor Jr. and 750 carb. It says that they used a dual plane and that they used 1.7 rockers on it. Yeah, there's no boost in the pole. Our pole is boostless. So foreign, you built a 347 with lightweight rotating assembly and routinely spun it to 8,500. That's a lot. But he bought it and put a Vortec on it and quickly split the block. Ram Man, we'll see you. Yeah, the old 331 versus 347 argument. Yeah, Dan, that's the scuttlebutt. That's talk around the shop that the 5-liter, the late model thin wall cast block split. What was the RPM peak power of the 400 horsepower motor? I haven't read the whole story, but somebody said that it was up around 6,000, which seems like a lot to me for the stock camshaft. Because when I ran the stock cam on the motor on the video that I did, it made peak power, I think, at 5,300. The 351 Windsor won't split. We've done way into the 4-digit stuff with 351 Windsors. Those are a lot stronger. Those don't have that reputation. Only the production 5-liters though. Stock, super stock, pro stock, ultra stock, mega stock, street stock. I think they use one of the stock lift cheater cams with more duration. Would you stop your RPM at 6,000 or 6,500? It depends on how you put your combination together. If I had that's one of the things that these long runner intake manifolds, the RPM2, certainly the GT40, the Cobra, all of those things, they limited where the thing wanted to rev. I don't think I ran mine much more than, I don't think I ran it maybe 6,500, but most of the time it was 62 or 63. Is Dart ever going to catch him on back? Or I don't know. Everybody's struggling with that. Yes, Megatron. NV1, aka Megatron. Fresh stock. How about livestock? You think a stock block 302 will hold 10 psi from a Vortec and be reliable? I ran mine, a Vortec on mine, for 85,000 miles. So I don't think we ran, I think it was more like 8 or 9 pounds. And we ran it higher than that a lot, but most of the time it drove around. That's about where it was. if you had an intercooler on it, it works good. I don't recommend the Vortec aftercooler. It's pretty small and restrictive. I think I have a video up where we ran on a 351 and it was kind of restrictive. But yeah, if the tune's right, I don't think that'll be a problem. The problem with having a Vortec on there is it makes you want to run higher engine speeds, because as you go up in engine speed, you go up in boost and you go up in power. So grooves, I hope that that's a real story with the silver solder thing. I want that to be true. That's kind of awesome. The Mondo box, I've run those before. I seem to see much more block splitting with the turbos on stock block 302s because the boost comes in so fast and hard. A Vortec ramps it in with RPM, and I ran by the Silver State where I'm talking about running like wide open throttle for 30 minutes at a time. So if it was going to break because of that, it would have broke then. Will, all of the fuel stuff that you have there is fine, because you're going to control that with tuning. You won't overfuel it if you have it tuned so that you're only supplying the amount of fuel that you need. Yeah, Stephen, a centrifugal blower will increase boost and flow with engine speed, and in this case, it's impeller speed, and it will keep doing that. That's if you change the pulley on it, you're doing the same thing. You're just changing it everywhere, but obviously it likes more speed up into whatever their listed maximum impeller speed is, and then for racers, it's that plus 10 or 15% because they run them out way more than that. Do an LS headed 351. It's just way too much work, and it's not worth it. PSI on my stock block. Is there any con to bigger heads? I argued with Caleb. I argued this point with back with Tom Wilson and the guys at Westech, and even the guys at Airflow Research, because they were all saying, "Oh yeah, 302, you got to put 165 heads on it." I told them no. I said I would pick the 185 over the 165 head every day of the week, because it flows more and you can ultimately make more power. And I don't think you're going to give away anything with the 185 head compared to the 165 head. How big of a Jimmy blower can you fit on it? It depends. I don't know what size intake manifolds they have for the 302s. I know that they have 671 stuff, and I don't know if they have 871 for that. Maybe it's bolts onto the same one. I don't know about the 10s and 12s and 14s. That's pretty cool about the camshaft. I also like the lofting and that kind of stuff. I've been reading a lot because when I finally went through my closets and gathered out the boxes of books that I have, because we had to move them. So I went through a lot of stuff and threw it away, unfortunately. But I went through a lot of books. Like I went down the book rabbit hole, not even the internet rabbit hole, on 928 Porsches, because I have books on that. The Nash Metropolitan, the 924 Turbo, the 911 or 911 Turbo, which I just watched a video where they ran all of the different, not all of them, but I think that they had 8 or 10 different generations of 911 turbos that were represented, and then they had a big drag race and they gave the specs on all of them. I love stuff like that. I love them seeing, although the thing that frustrates me is when they do that, like the newer modern traction controlled, more power, water cooled, sequential trans and all that was the fastest one, and I expected that. And the early 7-to-1 compression, non-intercooled, whatever, yada yada, that was the slowest one. The problem that I had is these over here, the fast ones, were running 10s, which I fully expect. But the little turbo that could went like 1470s. I'm like, that car wasn't a 1470 car back in the day. It went a lot faster than that. It went a lot quicker than that. And so I don't know who is driving them, and I don't know what kind of condition that car was in. And so it'd have been better to see them represented like they really could have. 185 or 205 on a 408. I would put a 205 on it. Miami's in the house. One more minute. Yeah, I was pretty certain that they ran 13s, especially after they put the after they went to the 3.3 liter when they put the intercooler and stuff on it. Then I know that they would run 13s. Turbo coupe engine with a natural metropolitan. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Getaway performance is in the house. So let me take the, our poll is very close. 52% are saying no, that you can't do it, and 48% saying yes, which leads me to the following conclusion that I definitely need to visit this and find out whether it's true or not. So we'll go ahead and end that poll. 165 versus 185 would be a good test. 165 versus a 185. I need to go back and look and see if I've run that test. I may have run that already. Love the small block Ford content. Would like to see an other guy's LFX test. What is that? Is that a Ecotech or something? A lot of the modified early turbos. Yeah, they 10s, because the car weighed next to nothing. And if you have a car like that hooks up and can make, 350 or 400 horsepower, which they certainly could, they'd be really fast. Best place to get the boost gauge. I like to have it in the intake manifold. Do you know what year the small block Chevy 350s are roller cam compatible? 86 or 87 they started. The Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forward's ultimate small block Ford test covered 165s and 185s. I know that that's true because I wrote that story. I did all that testing. But they weren't covered on the same motor. The 165s were in one group. They were in group 1, and 185s were in group 2. And then 205s were in group 3, and then 225s were in group 4. '87, okay. Is it true 79 and earlier small block Ford Windsor blocks had higher nickel content? The only ones I know that had higher nickel content, the earlier blocks were definitely thicker because when they went to the late model blocks, they're definitely thinner wall. The Mexico blocks are definitely higher nickel content and stronger, but I don't know if 79 is the breakaway year. Oh, LFX is the double over cam 3.6. Okay. Oh, you're giving me a shout out. Not all center bolts are roller though. Are all one-piece seal roller blocks? I don't know if that's the case. Might be. Those might be correlated. Oh, roller blocks, but not roller lifters. I thought that they put flat tappets in some of those, and some of the later ones. Yeah, more Summit Racing camshaft coming up on the Alphabet cams. I haven't talked to the gentleman on the Nova, although time is ticking away. I need to find out. I just want to go for a ride. I want to go for a ride, and I want it to be something really neat. I said that the Nova was coming along well. Nice. So I heard I heard from a little birdie that the Nova is going to get a so we'll start this rumor, is going to get a North Star engine. Do you think that that could happen? Probably not. What's your opinion on 351 Windsor 3-inch mains? RPMs seem to be a hot topic. I don't think it's an issue. Build a 302 or get a 351 Windsor would be better way to go, because right off the bat you're going to have an extra 50 horsepower and 50 foot-pounds. A twin turbo North Star, come on. Do you ever plan on doing chassis down testing? I have endless amounts of chassis down testing. Drive shafts. I've done drive shaft testing. I actually did carbon fiber drive shaft testing, and there's definitely power to be had there. And I also did a lot of cool things on the chassis dyno where we tested wheel size and wheel weight and things for changing moment of inertia, and all of that changes it. Basically, it needs everything. Just finished the rear diff today. Confirmed that it has a locker now. So why would you do the diff if it just has to burn out? It just has to have one wheel, right? A one-wheel keel. What was wrong with the diff? You're going to need to call me and catch me up on this. When are the Summit Letter Plus cam videos dropping? There's already one up, and then the other ones will drop after the tests happen. Is it true that carbon buildup on a high mileage 302 can make more compression? It is. It displaces some of the swept volume, but the thing is, how much does it take to make a difference? The left rear axle was bad. Was it broke or was it worn where the bearing wears? You only need the right axle. You only need one, right? So what did you put? What diff did you put in there? And is it an 8.2 or is it an 8.5 rear end? Is worn badly, then water and the gear oil made everything very nice and rusty. So this thing probably was underwater then. That's what we're thinking. It's got a bot going on. It's an 8.5. You know, it's a Spartan locker, lunchbox style. Had one from a 10-bolt. Nice. Mike, I agree. A 3800 would be kind of cool in there. But it would have to be like a twin turbo 3800 with the blower. But then you'd have to make two inlets going into the back of the blower. Detroit locker for the win. Jake, you need a quick recap. Good luck with that. How much boost can a stock 302 cast piston out of an F-150 take? I don't know. We did 1100 with the 351, so somewhere near there. Grooves, I never realized that, but that's very close. Getting it safe to drive. So how are all the bushings and stuff? Which I have those bushings here for you. And I'm getting ready to take a trip down to West Tech because I got to bring a bunch of shelving down there. Twin turbo Lumina 3400. I did a single turbo one of those. I'd be worried about something big twisting that thing in half. The ball joints and tie rods are all good. That's nice. Did you check out the radiator and that stuff that was in those boxes? One more minute again. Yeah, 100-point safety inspection on the Nova. It wants to be. It's a certified used car. It's got to go to CarMax. GT40 intake or 650 carb. Caleb, a dual plane and a 650 will make a lot more power than a GT40 will. That's all he has to do is a burnout, but he wants to go all in. And there being water in the diff confirms my suspicion, I think, of Nova's Ark, that this thing was a submarine. The hunt for Rust October. Gave it a quick glance, but I haven't gotten the cooling system yet. Pulled the engine and trans out for the second time to finish up the mounts. Man, you're doing it up. Obviously, you went to the right person. It obviously needed a snorkel. Okay, guys, I gotta get going. Hopefully, you guys have seen the video I put up on the cylinder head test. I'm excited about maybe revisiting that 400 horsepower stock cam thing. I'm a little suspect. I don't know that can really be done, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will see you all tomorrow. And boom, boomala.